The Harlem Renaissance was an intellectual movement of African American art and literature from the 1910s to the 1930s. Centered in Harlem, a neighborhood in New York City, the movement quickly spread and became a defining part of this era, often being considered the rebirth of African American art, music, and literature. To put it into historical perspective, this event also mirrors that of the Great Migration, where you see large numbers of African Americans moving not only from more rural areas into cities, but also from the south to the north. By 1920, around 300,000 African Americans had moved north, and one of the most popular destinations was Harlem. The Harlem Renaissance brought the African American community closer together. The movement had a huge impact on American culture as a whole. It also redefined how America and the world viewed African Americans and laid the foundations for the civil rights movement. Langston Hughes was one of the greatest poets to come out during this time period. He was one of the earliest innovators of jazz poetry. He traveled around the world during his life, but he was from Cleveland, Ohio, and moved to New York City as a young man, living in Harlem, where he made his career writing and eventually becoming famous for it. We hope that you enjoy the following poem by Langston Hughes and learning new ways to look at poetry.
Now that we know a little more about the Harlem Renaissance, let's talk a little bit more about poetry specifically. It sounds like a way bigger deal or something way more difficult than it actually is when we use the word analysis to describe thinking a little deeper about poetry or any writing or any art. It might be helpful to think about a poem as concentrated language that you can add your own insights to so that a new part of the poem can reveal itself. Sort of like when you have red paint and you add some white paint to it and then you end up with a lovely new pink. The poet will set some parameters for themselves to create a border for the poem, sort of like a picture frame. They may choose a specific rhyming pattern, a shape, a certain number of lines, or maybe just a specific feeling or object to describe. And then they will put all the best words they can force together into the picture frame to make the best picture that they can. It's then your job as the reader to look carefully at the art inside the frame, to think about what is included and what is not included. Consider the ways each word sounds. Is it hard or harsh sounding? Is it soft and full of whispers? Does the line of poetry end at a punctuation mark or in the middle of a sentence? Are there double or multiple meanings for a word in the poem? Do any of those extra meanings help you better understand or emotionally connect to that poem? What are the feelings that you get when you read the poem? What words and images make you notice those feelings? Can you think of anything in your own life or experience that seems similar to what you're reading about in the poem? And if the poem tells you about something that is so very different from anything you've ever experienced in your life, what did you learn about someone else's life or perspective in this poem? What about your life makes it so different from what you're reading about in the poem? Don't let yourself get caught up in thinking, I'm reading too much into this. That is the whole point and the fun of looking at, reading, and experiencing art of all kinds. The artist, or poet in this case, is showing you a small picture of something they noticed and thought was worth showing to you. See if you can figure out why they wanted to show you this tiny, concentrated picture. Now that we've learned a little bit more about analyzing poetry with words, what would happen if we made the jump to visual representations of that analysis? What if we made the jump from the words in our head about the poem to pictures about the poem? Now Mamie is going to show us what that process looked like for her when she found inspiration in Langston Hughes's poem, Harlem. We invite you and encourage you to do the same with this poem or with any others you might come across.
Harlem by Langston Hughes. What happens to a dream deferred? Does it dry up like a raisin in the sun? Or fester like a sore and then run? Does it stink like rotten meat? Or crust and sugar over like a syrupy sweet? Maybe it just sags like a heavy load. Or does it explode